Battleship is a classic two-player strategy game where the objective is to sink your opponent's fleet of ships before they sink yours. Here's a breakdown of the game and its rules. Overview of the game. Players, 2. Setup. Time, 5 minutes. Playtime, 20 to 30 minutes. Age, 7+ game components. Game boards. Each player has their own grid, typically 10 by 10, with coordinates labeled by numbers, 1 to 10, and letters, A to J. Ships. Each player has a fleet of ships of different lengths, typically including carrier, 5 spaces, battleship, 4 spaces, cruiser, 3 spaces, submarine, 3 spaces, destroyer, 2 spaces, hit, and miss. Markers. Players use these to keep track of their hits and misses on the opponent's board. Setup 1. Placing ships. Each player secretly places their ships on their grid. Ships can be placed either horizontally or vertically, but cannot overlap. 2. Game start. Players take turns calling out coordinates, e.g. B5, to try to hit their opponent's ships. Gameplay. Announcing hits and misses. When a player calls out a coordinate, if it hits a ship, the opponent must say hit. If it misses, the opponent says miss. Sinking ships. When all of a ship's spaces have been hit, the opponent announces that the ship is sunk, e.g., you sank my battleship. Marking the board. Players mark their guesses on their firing board and hits, misses on their ocean board. Winning the game. The game continues until one player has sunk all of the opponent's ships. The first player to do so wins the game. Strategy. Tips. Random versus systematic. Guessing. Some players start with random guesses, while others use systematic strategies, e.g., checking every other square. Concentration. Once you hit a ship, concentrate your efforts around that area to sink it. Mind games. Try to mislead your opponent about the locations of your remaining ships. Variations. Salvo version. In some versions, players can fire multiple shots per turn, 1 per remaining ship. Fog of war. In advanced versions, players can't see where their opponent has fired and must deduce the placement of enemy ships based on limited information. Sure, here's a short example of how a game of Battleship might play out. Example. Gameplay. Setup. Player 1 and Player 2 have placed their ships on their grids. Player 1's board. Carrier, A1, A5. Battleship, D3, D6. Cruiser, F7, F9. Submarine, J2, J4. Destroyer, H5, H6. Player 2's board. Carrier, B1, F1. Battleship, E5, E8. Cruiser, G3, G5. Submarine, J8, J10. Destroyer, C9, D9. Turn 1. Player 1, B2. Player 2, miss. Player 1 marks a miss on their firing board. Player 2, H5. Player 1, hit. Player 2 marks a hit on their firing board. Turn 2. Player 1, F7. Player 2, hit. Player 1 marks a hit on their firing board. Player 2, H6. Player 1, hit. You sank my destroyer. Player 2 marks a hit and sinks the destroyer. Turn 3. Player 1, F8. Player 2, hit. Player 1 marks another hit. Player 2, E5. Player 1 daughter, miss. Turn 4. Player 1, F9. Player 2, hit. You sank my cruiser. Player 1 marks a hit and sinks the cruiser. Player 2, F6. Player 1 fools was miss. Turn 5. Player 1, J2. Player 2, miss. Player 2, D3. Player 1, hit. Player 2 marks a hit. Continuing the game continues in this manner, with players taking turns guessing coordinates and attempting to sink each other's ships. The tension builds as the number of remaining ships dwindles. The first player to sink all of their opponent's ships wins the game. This example shows how the gameplay flows and how players respond to hits and misses.